Hi, everyone. Before the episode begins, I just want to remind you to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Marlene the Plant Lady and YouTube, Everything Gardening with Marlene Simon. And remember, please, please, please rate and review on iTunes and Spotify. That just helps the podcast get noticed by more people, and then more people will become better gardeners. And that's what we all want. So enjoy the episode.
Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour. I'm your host, Marlene, and today we're going to talk about kids gardening because April is Kids Gardening Month. Of course, I'm sure we all agree that every month, every day should be Kids Gardening Day, but April, it's definitely highlighted. So joining me is Em Shipman. She is the Executive Director of KidsGardening.org, and we're going to discuss the importance of why kids should be out in the garden, and we're going to go over some things that if you have kids at home, you could incorporate in your life, maybe get involved in their school, and maybe take a look at these lesson plans that I was actually pretty amazed about. So, Em, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Marlene. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, is your background gardening or?
My background actually is gardening. Yeah. Long story, right? But I grew up in rural New Hampshire and I gardened as a child with my mom. And I'm so thankful for that. Always she set aside a little part of her garden that I could do whatever I wanted with, like sprinkle seeds, or if like a friend's mom would divide a plant for me, I could bring home that piece of a plant and stick it in there. I remember I had lamb's ears growing up and I would always walk around barefoot and pet them with my feet, with my bare feet. So soft. They were my favorite. And bleeding heart was one of my first plants I had as well. And I just thought it was amazing, the little flowers. And it kind of is amazing, right?
Yeah, it is.
Those little flowers hanging down, little bleeding hearts.
Is
it's just so neat.
It's funny how we remember as kids our first plants that we grew.
Yeah.
Mine.
Right?
And then you always have just this fondness for them. Like for me, it was nasturtiums and cosmos. So
Yeah,
those
are good.
Those
Yeah,
are two of my
those are good
favorite
ones.
flowers still, even before I knew that.
Nasturtiums still
Yeah.
for me too.
They're just such a happy plant. So now you are the executive director of KidsGardening.org. And I don't have kids. I work at a university, but we do have a lot of young kids coming through. And I was briefly telling you how I got a email from a first, second grade teacher saying, we would love to visit, but is this age appropriate? And I wrote back right away saying, oh yeah, we have kids, pre-K coming through. And we tell them the same exact information pretty much, just, slightly catered. But it's amazing how adults are amazed by, a mimosa plant, sensitive plant is just as much as like a 5-year-old, when you touch it, it closes. And just like you, I grew up gardening, and I think it's taught me so much and appreciation for so much. So go on and just tell me what the mission of your organization is, what you guys do, and then we'll sort of go into the importance of gardening.
Sure. Yeah, I'm really happy to. And, before I answer that, I will say that I also was a professional gardener for a number of years as well. So background as a gardener as a kid, but then as an adult as well. And I think, although I'm not necessarily hands-on using those skills now, it, like you just said, it has helped me so much in so many areas of my life. But when I came to Kids Gardening, I was thrilled to find this organization. So we're a 40-year-old organization. We were founded in 1982. And in 2016, we became, previously we were a program of the National Gardening Association. 2016, we became an independent nonprofit, and that's when I joined the organization. And our mission is to create opportunities for kids to play, learn, and grow through gardening. engaging their natural curiosity and wonder, which is what you were just talking about with that mimosa plant. Like even a 5-year-old or a 45-year-old, that natural curiosity and wonder that we feel when we encounter that plant, that bleeding heart flower, that mimosa sensitive plant. It's like that wonder is something that we want to help people hang on to for their whole lives, because we think it has so many benefits in connecting people to nature and creating lifelong learners. So what we do at Kids Gardening is we support educators and families with primarily three things. We have grant funding. So we have a number of grants that we offer throughout the course of the year. We develop original educational resources. So anything from fun, easy activities that parents can do at home with their kiddos to, a high school soil science curriculum and everything in between. So really sort of rigorous, standards-based curriculum, and then just the fun, easy stuff to build positive associations with gardening and with nature.
So
And then the third thing that we do, just quickly, the last thing is that in May of 2021, we launched something called the Kids Garden Community. And it's a place where folks can go online for free. It's community.kidsgardening.org. And they can join this community and network with other garden educators or parents who are gardening with kids. Anyone can join, and it's a place to ask questions and chat about, what's working well or what questions you have if you're gardening with kids.
Oh, that sounds fun. That's
Yeah.
I mean that's a great resource. I can imagine like parents just going, I'm sure during the pandemic,
Exactly.
I mean
Yeah.
that would have been so crucial for parents who are just like, what do I do with my kids at home? And also with teachers who don't have maybe the background in plants, but want to be able to teach students about plants and learn it as the students are learning too. I want to go back to the grants. Where are those grants? Like, who could apply for the grants? Is it primarily schools? And just tell me a little bit about the process there.
Yeah, great question. So we have 4 or 5 different grant opportunities throughout the year, and we phase them so that there's sort of one open to apply to almost at all times. The majority, let's see, I would say about half of them are for schools only, and half are for schools or any organization or even sort of group. You don't have to be a formal, like, nonprofit 501c3 organization, but you could be a project under another organization or fiscally sponsored or something. And so about half of the grants are open for less formal organizations and schools to apply to as well. One thing about the work that we do is, we want to reach anyone who's gardening with kids, not necessarily just educators. There are a lot of great organizations out there doing the really important work of making sure that schools have gardens if they want them. And we work on that as well. But we want to also reach libraries and community centers and after school programs and parents and grandparents with opportunities for kids to garden. So wherever kids are, we want there to be opportunities for them to be able to garden.
Yeah, that's great, because we do know that obviously getting kids outside is important. And, on your website, you state, all the importance of gardening. And, I could just nod my head going, yes, of course. Of course, you have on the top of the list mental health. And
Yeah.
I just remember when I was growing up and I was outside hiking, because that's, gardening and hiking were my thing. And, I was 8 years old and my mom was like, you're the happiest when you're hiking. And,
Mhm.
and it's
Smart
true
mom.
because I think just the way my brain worked, it would, a borderline ADHD is I would be overwhelmed by so much stimuli around me, and just being out in nature is just calming and soothing.
Yeah.
Of course, you have food, growing your own food security, nutritional awareness. That's true about organic food, where your food's coming from, physical activity, 100%. Oh my goodness. Environmental stewardship. taking ownership of the land. I love that. Learning, of course. And then that community connectiveness is, when you get out and you start gardening, especially in a community garden or community setting, you start relying on it. So you guys came up with these, and do you strive to sort of meet all these goals and meet all these key points when you're out giving grants and
We
creating your
do.
lessons?
Yeah, in grants, in reviewing grant applications, we are looking for programs who are trying to be innovative and, you know, have the most benefit for youth, with these themes in mind, right? So we actually have one grant that is called the Budding Botanist Award, and that grant is specifically for programs who are trying to increase environmental stewardship, environmental awareness, and biodiversity. And so programs that are teaching kids about biodiversity and that are really environmentally focused are often the awardees for that grant. And when we're developing content, so activities and lesson plans and curriculum, we are looking at these themes and giving educators resources to be able to address these themes. Like, so each month we'll have a different theme for our content. So we release a free e-newsletter each month. I mean, it's sort of like a understatement to call it an e-newsletter because it's this content dump or download that shows up in your inbox every 2 weeks, so twice a month, and it has a new activity and a new lesson plan and all kinds of new garden-based learning content. And this month, for example, our theme was social emotional learning, and so we developed a bunch of resources around how gardens can help kids learn social skills, learn self-awareness and emotional intelligence, slow down and find mindfulness. So we take these themes and we find activities and lessons that educators can do within them to help support them and bring even more benefits to youth. So, another example might be during October, during Farm to School Month, we might focus more on food and growing food, or maybe culturally appropriate food. And what recipes does your family make, and what are the vegetables that your family grows, and what's important to your culture? So there's endless things you can write about and teach about when it comes to the garden. And as you were listing off the benefits, I was thinking, they're really all tied together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you had mentioned, you noticed and your mom noticed you were calmest when you were physically active outdoors. It's like the mental health and the physical health are clearly tied together.
Mm-hmm.
And then the connection to nature improves mental health. And I think we know that when we're more connected to our communities, which we can do through gardening, our mental health improves as well. So all these things sort of like build on one another. And it's just an amazing thing when kids get into the garden, the different benefits that they can see. And I think it's different for every kid. It's sort of depending on what they need.
Yeah, and I also think, and this definitely fits in with the environmental stewardship, but I also think it's ownership and it's responsibility, and it's also troubleshooting, because I know as a professional gardener and then a home gardener, one of the biggest things you do is troubleshoot, and with that,
Yeah.
you're not just Googling an answer necessarily. Of course, that's what people want to do. They want, my plant has this problem. I'm going to Google it, but you sort of have to take in the big picture, think outside the box, and start doing some critical thinking about, okay, I watered this yesterday. Is this a water issue? Are there bugs? So I think it's really teaching kids to think critically, work through a problem, and find a solution. And it might be work with a team to do so. It might, then it might teach them then, okay, let's do some research and figure it out. So I think that's a big part of why I think I actually like gardening, is sometimes it's a mystery and you have to figure out what's going on. and that could be fun in itself. And I don't think kids are even realizing you're doing it. I know I'm not realizing when I'm doing it. Sometimes it's just like, I just need to figure out this problem. But at the end, you're like, wow, you sort of just work through the whole entire hypothesis process, and you
Yeah.
came to
Yeah.
it.
Right.
And then then they're like, you know what? I solved this problem. I took ownership of it and I was able to solve it. And wow, I feel good about myself. So, I think that's a big part of gardening, is that self-esteem building.
I do too. Yeah, I think it is really empowering for kids. And I don't know that kids, I know that teachers are absolutely doing the best that they can within our current educational system, but I don't know how many opportunities kids have for that kind of hands-on trial and error type of experiential education in classrooms these days, just because class sizes are so big and it's hard for educators to be able to do that with 20 or 30 kids.
Yeah.
And with gardening, the fun thing is like the risks are pretty low, right? Like this, so the seedling dies, so
Yeah.
you start a new seed. It's so nice. There are very few things in life where you're like, oh, I made that mistake, and like I get to notice what went wrong and like just try again. And it's really empowering when you, like you said, figure it out on your own and master it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's why, the grant program is so good, because I think a lot of schools are probably using it to build their own school garden. And luckily, I find, well, I'm in a very, university based. A lot of parents are very active, and I know that's not in every social situation. They just can't. If they're working so much, they don't have any time. But usually with gardening, there's at least, a few people who are willing to volunteer their time to go in
Yeah.
and at least start the program and help the kids. But I imagine, as these school gardens are getting more and more popular, hopefully that's where the kids could sort of put that to use versus the teachers having to fit that into their curriculum during the day, because I know, time is so short for them. So hopefully, I mean, horticulture should be bigger in schools personally, but that's just coming from someone who
Yeah.
works with plants. Let's talk a little bit about some lessons. And I was, you always expect to see, okay, start the peas in the cup. But as I was reading through some of them, that really hit on me, and I'm like, ooh. The first one that I sort of was stopped, I'm like, well, I want to know about that, is learn about landfills. I mean, I was like, as someone who, has gone to the dump landfill before, you just see and you're like, wow, what is going on? That seems like it'd be for older kids, or what age do you start that? And what's that curriculum like? Is that for like high school students, or?
I think that that is probably one of our digging deeper. So
Okay.
we have this category of resources called digging deeper, and it's sort of like things you might wonder about, like what are, for example, what are some indigenous agricultural practices that that are currently sort of being used mainstream or were appropriated by white folks. Like that would be a digging deeper topic, or a digging deeper topic would be fermented foods around the world, or like you said, learn about landfills. And those are tended more towards middle school, and an opportunity for kids to say, like I've never thought about that before. Like we could really, that's not something like that's typically taught in school. And it's sort of related to, adjacent to plants and gardening and environmentalism. And we could dig into this a little bit more. So the digging deepers are a really fun opportunity for us to share things that we think are sort of important for kids to know, but might be sort of glossed over or not even mentioned in school.
Yeah,
But
because you had
could start a new line of learning for them.
Yeah, because I could see how that could completely relate to and go into a chemistry class. And yeah, like you said, even a history class. Another one you had that I, stopped, because these are literally what university students that I meet up with are doing, like pollination, of course, but you can make it fun. And I'm always amazed and saddened when we do this pollination lesson, when the certain lab comes through and, the students have to look at a flower and sort of come up with what pollinates it. And I have to ask a lot of them, well, haven't you ever seen just like a bee loaded down with pollen on its legs? And they look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, oh, I guess that's because I was exposed to it and I'm out in the garden all the time, that I just assume everyone knows that, they've seen bees with pollen on them.
Yeah. Well,
But
and you maybe weren't taught to be scared of bees, and perhaps
Mhm.
you were taught to slow down and notice. It's like, maybe these folks were exposed to bees, but they ran in the other direction, or they didn't
Yeah.
have, didn't slow down enough to see, to notice the bees. So I think there's all these sort of things in our culture that kind of work against us
Eh,
connecting with nature.
Yeah, and that brings me to a good point, because a lot of times the first thing you hear out of kids when you say we're going to go out into the garden is, ew, I don't want to play in the dirt. I don't want to get dirty. Ew, are there going to be bugs?
Hmm.
What are some ways that parents and teachers could sort of alleviate that disgust, that fear?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I agree. It's a big challenge, and I didn't really realize the degree of the challenge, because I think, like you, I grew up
Mm-hmm.
in the garden and just never
Yeah,
thought to think ew, but it's real for a lot of
it
kids.
is.
And our advice is to take it slowly, and really, like, you're gonna have a counterproductive, results if you push
Mm-hmm.
too hard. Um, if you push kids like past their comfort zone too quickly, it's not going to be productive. So our advice is really to slowly look at and wonder and ask questions and introduce kids to these things. And I was actually at the National Children and Youth Garden Symposium that's put on by the American Horticultural Society last summer, and I did a really neat workshop on introducing kids to scary creatures.
Yeah.
So snakes, bugs, and worms. And the woman who was giving the workshop suggested to actually have toys, to have the little sort of plastic replicas
Mm-hmm.
of those creatures around for kids to just like look closely at. Like, there are some very realistic replicas. So for kids to look closely at and hold in their hands and sort of imagine it were real, and get a little bit more comfortable with it. And then, maybe go out in the garden and stand back and look at it and watch while other kids investigate. But really don't, we would suggest that you don't dismiss kids' fears and disgust, and you don't push them, because it's not going to work. I
Yeah.
think what really works is just easing them slowly into it.
Yeah. And we all have phobias. My mom has a phobia of worms.
Yeah.
And people have
Yeah.
phobias of spiders. I have a phobia of snakes. And so we're all going to have a phobia, or just sort of a dislike. But I think it's that overall we're taught that bugs are bad. You may even
Yeah.
have you see the pest control trucks pull up in your neighborhood, and you may just say bugs are bad. So it's that overall just dislike. But I think that's a good idea of just showing maybe the difference. Because if you say, oh, I hate bugs. Do you hate ladybugs? And it's like, well, no, I like ladybugs. They're good bugs. But then show them,
Mhm.
well, spiders are good, and maybe not spiders, but here's another bug that's good. So maybe I break it down so they could be allowed to dislike maybe 3 bugs or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. And it depends on where you live and what kind of safety you have to teach. We don't have a lot of
Yes.
dangerous creatures here in Vermont, where I am.
Uh-huh.
So I don't have to teach my kids, necessarily to be scared of spiders. We don't have very many biting
Yeah.
or venomous spiders, but some places, you might need to.
For
One thing I was
sure.
also thinking is, if there are folks out there listening who are scared of bugs themselves, but don't want to pass that on to their kiddos or their students, like, maybe try to keep it to yourself, or
Exactly.
try to just regulate your reaction. Because I know there's some adults in my life who have a big reaction to
Uh-huh.
bugs and things, and
Yeah.
and my kids have picked that up from them.
100%. I agree. If a kid, they're sort of going to mirror the actions and like, well, wow,
Yeah.
if this adult is afraid of this. But going back to yes, I mean, I was taught you never just messed with any snake growing up in case it was a
Right.
rattlesnake. And
Yeah.
we have black widow spiders. Luckily, they're very distinct, but in the South, I think there's, multiple venomous snakes. So yeah, it's always good to teach, kids to be cautious, but it's sort of that balance of you just don't want, oh my God, all bugs are bad. And but yeah, it's true. If you're an adult, try to rein that in. You can have
Mhm.
phobias, but don't pass them on. Um,
Yeah.
what would you say if a parent or a teacher wanted to do, say, a project, ease into it? What would be some of the simplest projects? Say someone doesn't have a big garden or even like any garden space, but wants to start introducing kids to plants, to gardening. What are some simple lessons that aren't expensive, that don't require a lot of upfront cost? What could parents do?
Yeah, good question. Those are the criteria that we sort of have in mind when we develop resources for educators and caregivers. It's like, this can't require too many
Mhm.
materials. Honestly, probably shouldn't take too long because kids don't have really long attention spans. And what can folks do sort of, yeah, quickly and easily. And when you come to our site, you'll see on the homepage there's a place where you can click for caregivers
Mm.
or for educators. So there's sort of a different journey on the site for each of those groups, because we know that you would be doing different things in the garden with kids. But starting off with caregivers, I think, container gardening is really fun. Like if you're just getting started gardening, we don't advise, like spending $5,000 and going all in and doing like 5 raised beds and a hoop house or whatever, and, filling it full of
Yeah.
organic
Mhm.
topsoil and doing the whole thing. Like, start small, in a way that is not going to be overwhelming, because there is maintenance involved with gardening. Like, start in containers, and um, it's always fun to start things from seed with kids, but maybe go out to the nursery and also pick out a few starts or a few seedlings, because you'll have the opportunity to sort of look around at what's interesting for kids. And if you are gardening with kids, like, let kids lead, talk to them about what their favorite fruits and veggies are, and see if those are things that will grow in your area, and try to grow those. And, when I'm gardening with my sons, the food that we grow tends to be like a lot of snack food. So cherry tomatoes and the tiny little like diva cucumbers and little snacking veggies. Because those are fun for kids, and it's not like, it's a more instant gratification than, say, a pumpkin that you might need to
Yes.
roast. Although kids love pumpkins, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's why radishes are great because they're so
Hmm.
fast. It's almost like instant gratification, even though gardening does teach you patience. Um, but I think that one's a fun one as well. And like peas and beans because they grow so fast.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Peas and beans are really fun. And those big seeds. So, this actually leads me nicely to a really fun thing to do with kids at home, is just to create a seed viewer. So, if you have a clear plastic cup, or you could use a glass,
mhm.
but it needs to be clear so you can see through the sides. You actually moisten a paper towel and insert that moist paper towel inside the glass, but around the edges of it. And then stick a seed between the paper towel and the glass.
Mm.
And you can water that from just, like pouring a little bit of water into the glass. The paper towel will soak that up. The seed will moisten and sprout, and you'll be able to watch the root come down and to watch the seed open up and unfurl. And it's really just super cool. I've also done it in plastic bags with my kids. And then we like, and, and the reason I thought peas and beans were a good lead into this is because doing this activity with big seeds is really nice. Beans are perfect for this.
Yeah.
You do want a big seed, like, so a pumpkin might work too. Although I really do think like a big old lima bean or
Yeah.
something would be the perfect thing. And in general, when you're working with kids and seeds, just remember that they don't have very little kids don't have
Mhm.
great fine motor skills. And
Yeah.
we tend to recommend big seeds for little hands because they can handle those better. Like they're not going to do like arugula or something, like
Yeah.
tiny little speck
They're gonna
seeds. It's hard for them.
Yeah, they're gonna dump all the seeds in one container. There, I did. You're like, "Oh."
Yeah.
Or tomato seeds when they stick together and you're trying to, like, peel them apart. You're like, "Ah."
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a fun one.
Another fun one
Uh-huh.
for parents is kitchen scrap gardening, and you'll find that on the site. But that's like, starting an avocado in the kitchen, an avocado pit, and letting that sprout, or taking the end of the celery and letting that regrow. Watching some of your kitchen scraps, some of your veggie scraps resprout and regrow in the kitchen can be really fun for kids. And it's nice to set things up like the seed viewer, like the kitchen scraps in a place like the kitchen where you hang out every day with your family and you can sort of just notice it. You
Yeah.
walk by it and like, oh, look at what it's doing today. Like it's just a fun thing to slow down and check it out. And it like becomes like a pet, where you're like, look, it's doing that today. Like,
Yeah.
oh, it
Mhm.
looks like it needs a little water.
Exactly. And I think even just and I think you had a lesson that was like, is it a fruit or a vegetable? But I also think an
Yeah.
important thing is what part of a plant are you eating? And just even
Mm-hmm.
quizzing, like you're making potatoes, so you could say, okay, what part of a plant are we eating, and why is this structure like this? And broccoli. A lot of people never even stop to think. And you get older, and I have adults who are like, I don't even know what part of broccoli we're eating, and it just makes you more of aware of the whole process of plants and what plants do. So I think anything could be made into a lesson. You were talking about foods in culture, and we're recording this on St. Patrick's Day. So what most people are going to eat is potatoes and cabbage today, and it could be a great lesson. Why are we eating potatoes and cabbage today? And
Exactly.
corned beef too,
Yeah.
but it could just be, well, why is that important? And it could just be like, well, this is the foods, and that could lead into our whole family immigrated to the U.S. because of the potato famine. So depending
Mm-hmm.
on what age, so anything really. I mean, it's amazing how everything is affected by plants. When young kids come to the conservatory and say they just went to like the entomology museum where they got to see the hissing cockroaches. I have to compete against that. So, because when you tell kids you're going to go see plants, they're like, oh, okay. But I sort of engage them quickly by how many of you ate plants today for breakfast? And they have to think about it.
Mm.
How many of you are wearing plants today, cotton based? How many of you are breathing something plants made? And if it was hot, it was like, how many of you were, cooling off under, so it's amazing how anything could be really turned into a lesson. And once they start being aware of plants around them, I guess there's something called plant blindness, where you're just not
Yeah.
aware of plants around you because you see the squirrels jump out, you see the squirrels move, but it's just even getting kids used to looking at plants around them. I think is
Yeah.
so
Or they just
important.
think plant. Like they just see something green and think
Uh-huh.
plant.
Yeah.
Like not like
Yeah.
it's an oak tree or it's a rhododendron or like it's a hosta. It's just plants, which is like amazing to me. And like you said, they have such different uses
Mhm.
and values in our lives. And
Yeah.
it,
I
it is kind of astounding how important they are, yet how little people know about them.
Yeah. I didn't read all your lessons, but I imagine you probably have something even on textiles for older kids.
I think we do. Yep. And we have like some fun natural dyeing
Yeah.
lessons and things too, which using plants to dye textiles. And yeah, we have things on fibers. I
Yeah.
mean, and we have as you were talking about all of the uses for plants, we have a t-shirt for sale on our site that just says plants, plants, plants. And I love it so much because it's like what we're talking about now is like sort of my soapbox. I'm always going around and talking to people about how everything is plants. Like, we
Everything.
need to appreciate plants. And so we created this shirt, plants, 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 and everyone on our team just loves it.
Yeah, that sort of sums it up. And I always say we also, sadly, kids a lot of times only hear plants in the news when, say, a tree's fallen and hurt someone. And,
Yeah.
I joke that we never hear in the summertime where it gets really hot here, oh, this tree today provided cooling and oxygen for this many people today. It's nope, this tree fell and hurt someone, or I
Yeah.
fell out of this tree and hurt myself. So it's, and I'm sure you see this too, is when people come into the conservatory, a lot of times the kids are like, what are the most poisonous plants? Are there any plants in here that are going to kill you?
I
And,
know.
and I have to tell them we have no plants that were really going to outright kill you. But I said, almost any plant, if you eat too much of it, you could get sick. And so a lot of kids are just terrified of certain plants. And it goes back, I guess, to the bugs. I guess it slowly introduced them to plants in a way that they're not going to be scared.
And I think, like, probably anything we're scared of, it's like you just actually have to become a little bit more intimate with it, get to know it a little bit better, and you have more information about it, and then you'll be less scared. But maybe it's like the unknown aspect of it that's making them so scared.
So what's so you said your 2021 you guys developed the community.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about that, because I'm almost picturing almost like a Facebook type thing. But
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is we're doing a little renovation right now, and it will actually look a lot like your Facebook
okay.
feed when we're done with this, because people are so accustomed to interacting in that way. But that is what it is. You log on to the community. It's free to create a profile, and you can put a picture in or not, and you can fill out some information about yourself or not. But you can say where you live, how you garden with youth. So we have a bunch of different things you can fill out to say, I work with kindergartners, or I work with 8th graders, or I do special education, or I'm interested in pollination, or you can talk about what you're interested in. And then there are just all kinds of discussions happening. So right now, some of the most popular discussions that are happening are, what are some recommendations for rain gear and science kits? So people are just talking about their favorite rain gear that they use with kids and their favorite science kits.
Okay.
And then there was recently a chat. Someone had just moved to the South, and she was a garden educator, and she was saying, I know I can get started planting right now, but like what kinds of things should I be planting in the South in March, And all these people chimed in to say, this is what you should put in from seed, and this is what you can do from starts. And like in a couple months, you can put in these other things. And it's just amazing how, you probably know as a gardener, like we just want to help other gardeners, and we just love any excuse to talk about gardening. So that's what this is like any excuse to talk about kids and gardening. People are just having a great time asking each other questions and sharing their favorite resources. We also have a few pages within the community where people can see events that are coming up.
Okay.
So
that's great.
Larger events, like if they're national or if they are like a regional event that people can attend. We also have a place where people can check out grant opportunities. So in addition to our own grants, we also keep a running calendar of all of the grants that we're aware of that are available for people who garden with kids. So you can go in there and see, like, almost at any time, there's some grants you could be applying to.
That's great.
Yeah, it is great. There's a lot more out there than you might think.
Yeah.
And then lastly, there's a resource library, which is a place where a group of folks, not only from Kids Gardening, but from a bunch of our peer organizations, have come together to review different curriculum and guides associated with gardening with youth. And we've really vetted them with quite a pretty rigorous set of criteria around being inclusive and being, scientifically accurate. And so this is sort of like the top, like the best of the best garden-based
Yeah.
learning curriculum, and you can access it there. And so if folks have curriculum, they can submit it to be reviewed by this committee and put up on the community.
Okay, that's great. And as I'm on the board of the Sac Botanic Gardens, Sacramento does not have a botanic garden, but we are trying to get one. And of course, when we're making a list of what needs to be in a botanic garden, it was just like a no-brainer that it would be a kid's garden.
Mm.
And, growing up loving plants, I thought, of course, every garden was for kids, but this goes sort of back to the lamb's ear, where a kid's garden, you have your schools tend to right now vegetables are huge, which is really important, but also, some parents, gardens, botanic gardens, they want to have a sort of more of a tactile sensory garden. Do you have a list of like kids gardens on the website where people could go and the kids could actually sort of experience all that by touching and smelling? Or
We don't, but that's a really good idea because I know of some great kids gardens out there, and
Mhm.
we do. We have worked with the American Public Garden Association,
Mhm.
and specifically, they have a committee of an education committee, and there are some really good ones out there that parents can bring their kids to, but also educators could do field trips to. Where I live, we always go to the Booth Bay Botanical Gardens in Booth Bay, Maine, are incredible.
Oh, do they have a lot of? Because I think that's another thing that I'm not a big fan of, but I understand. Like when kids visit our conservatory, I say I don't have too many rules, but one is these are living beings. You want to be treated with respect, so respect our plants. And I say we have some very rare plants, and you could touch anything. And I ask them, do you really want to touch the spiny plants? They're like, no. But, some botanic gardens you go into and you see like the orchid display and it's a no touching the orchid flowers. And, all these signs like, don't touch this, don't touch that. And I understand why, but that could sort of be off-putting for kids. So I think it's always good if then they go to a section where it's a garden just for them and they could all the flowers are very fragrant. All the leaves, like the lamb's ear are super fuzzy, or the mimosa,
Yeah.
you touch it. And that's what really gets kids. We have the Cassandra plant, the firecracker plant, that when you put water on the fruits, it explodes. And
So
so
cool.
we have to show, it's, you sort of, it's sort of I test myself like, okay, this kid doesn't look like he's into plants. By the end of this kid's going to be into plants. So, but I think that's one exposure is even if, the parents are like, I want to go to a botanic garden. The kids are like, I'm bored. But if a botanic garden has a kids area where they, it's sort of like an amusement park, but for kids and plants, I think that would help maybe get some future gardeners there. So,
Yeah, exactly. It's like if it feels too stuffy or like an art
mhm.
museum where you can't touch anything, it's not fun. But yeah, if you can interact with it. And I think that's the beauty of children's gardens. It's like they're interactive and there should be places where kids can play and they should be able to touch the plants and
Yeah.
dig dig around and maybe make music. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think I've been to some really, I'm lucky in this job that, I tend to go to conferences that take place in botanic gardens. So I've had that opportunity. And typically the children's area is my favorite because, yeah, you can touch things.
Yeah, and adults are amazed too. So, yeah, plant people
Hmm.
any city plant people go to, the first thing they go to really is the botanic garden. Get off the plane or
Yes.
get out of the car and you're like, "Where's your botanic garden?" So, and if you have
Exactly.
kids, you're like, "I'm dragging you to the botanic garden." They're probably like, this better have a fun area for me." So,
Yes,
um
exactly.
So this has been very educational. I love the fact that you have other grants on there. As someone who and I'm not saying for me, but as someone who is looking at grants for the university and doing certain things, it's always nice when people have a list of other grants because it could be hard looking for those, and you may not qualify for your grant, but having that resource there is great.
Yeah, and we want people to be able to access this as easily as possible. And teachers, a lot of the teachers that we work with, they're full-time classroom teachers.
Mhm.
They're writing these grants on their own time
Yeah.
at night at home. And, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to find the grants, but then also for our own grants, make them
Mhm.
as easy as possible to apply to, because I think, we just need to get that money out there into
Yeah.
people's hands and
Yeah.
into gardens.
And where does most of the funding come from? Where
For our grants, it comes from corporate sponsors. So we work
okay.
with different companies whose priorities are around, either education or maybe pollinators, or like I was mentioning earlier, biodiversity, or even just, community building or greening the communities. And then we work with those companies to develop the grants.
Okay. So that's good that at least, the corporations are paying it forward. And
Exactly.
yeah. Okay. So and I didn't realize you guys have been around for 40 years.
Yeah,
That's
40 years. So
yeah.
National Gardening Association was our sort of our parent
Okay.
organization. And then in 2016, we became our own independent nonprofit.
Okay. And even though you're Vermont based, these grants are anyone in the US could apply?
Yeah, anyone in the US, including, the territories, Puerto Rico. And we actually now have the opportunity for people to apply to our grants in Spanish if there's
Okay.
native Spanish
Uh-huh.
speaking. And I should have mentioned earlier when we were talking about our educational content, like our activities and lesson plans, those are available in Spanish as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're just trying to make sure that,
Mhm.
everyone who wants access to these resources has access.
Okay. Do you have any I imagine there's some videos that go along with this, but do you have a separate YouTube or the videos housed on the website?
We do have YouTube, and I think it's just Kids Gardening. Let's
Okay.
see if I can look right now. But yeah, we have YouTube with a few videos there.
Okay.
But I don't think that we're not using YouTube as like
Yeah.
social media per
Uh-huh.
se. We're using it to house some of the
Yeah.
videos that are more informational for our resources.
Yeah. So almost everything could be found at kidsgardening.org. And
Yes,
I'll have
yes,
in the
and
show notes, I'll have other links for everything as well. So people could take a look at that. But that's the main one where I'm going to go back and take a look at more of the lessons. Like,
there's so many there. There are
there's a
hundreds
lot.
there. And we have a nifty little system where you can filter based on what you're interested in or what age you're working with.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and a lot of these activities are fun to do as an adult as well.
I,
So,
I'm,
even if you don't have kids,
yeah.
you can still do them.
Well, I'm going to read through them because I think, like I said, there was one that was like imperfect flowers. How does, how does that help with diversity? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is what we're doing like college level, but why can't it be for younger kids? Why can't it even be elementary school or younger? It would make my job easier if kids came in well versed in all of this.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, instead I'm like, okay, let's go back to the basics here, but that's great. So, this has been a lot of fun. I'll have all the notes on the show notes and any last parting comments you want to say or suggestions?
I would just encourage people to visit the website and mention that, as you said in the opening, April is Kids Garden Month, and we're running a really fun contest. So anyone who gardens with kids can enter. And our theme is Let's Grow Together. So we're just asking kids to tell us how gardening brings them closer with their friends and family and community. And you can enter by submitting art, submitting photos, videos, dioramas, whatever it is you want to use to enter the contest. And we have all kinds of fun prizes people can win. So you'll be able to find that at our website or on our social media at Kids Gardening.
Awesome. That sounds like fun. So that also sounds like something parents and kids could do together, which is always
Yes,
fun.
exactly.
Yeah. So thank you, Em. And until next time, everyone, happy gardening.